housekeeping announcements to make. First of all, there are no planned fire alarm tests today, so if you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is at St John's Churchyard off Druid Street over there. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area down that way. There's a refreshment machine over there for use by members of the public in the waiting area outside of this room. Finally, please switch your mobile phones to silent whilst in the meeting room. This meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Members of the public are welcome to film, audio record, photograph or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. However, I'd ask you to please be considerate to other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceedings. If you are filming the meeting, please do not film other members of the audience, just members of the committee and officers. If you need to use the Council's Wi-Fi, the code for accessing that is FR33 capital W, little I, little f, little I, exclamation mark. So that is as on the screen behind me. During the meeting, members of the committee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of the meeting, send or receive emails, texts, messages or tweets concerning the business of the committee. That was Councillor Leeming trying to join us. So before I get to the next bit, could somebody just go? Thanks, Ellie, thank you. Just in time, Richard, for me to ask if we've had any apologies for the meeting. I've received two, Councillor Cleo Soanes and Councillor Bethan Roberts. Councillor Newins is here to act as a reserve for Councillor Soanes. Have we had any other apologies? Thank you. Will the voting members of the committee please indicate by raising their hands? So that is 6 of us. And is it worth at this point asking officers of the meeting to introduce yourselves so that people are aware who is here as an officer? Dipesh, can I start with you?
Dipesh Patel, Manager of Major Applications and New Homes Team Planning.
Hi, I'm Michael Tsakaris, Group Manager, Design, Conservation and Transport.
Gemma Rusher, Strategics.
Sean Good, NRP, working with Southwark for highways and transport.
I'm Alex Gillott, I'm a planning lawyer for the council.
I'm Greg Weaver, I'm the Constitutional Clerk for the Planning Committee.
Colin Wilson, Head of Strategic Developments.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Notification of any items of business which the Chair deems urgent. So we have an addendum report and the members' pack has been circulated, and as part of the addendum report there's 2 additional pieces of information presented from British Land about Canada Water. Has everybody got those in front of them? Thank you. Disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be considered at this meeting? Councillor Whittam.
Yeah, I'm councillor for Rotherhithe Ward, which this application almost sits in or is very adjacent to. But I retain an open mind.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meetings. So we have minutes for the 19th of April 2022. So those of us that were there for that meeting, are people happy with those as a correct record? Which might just be the 2 of us, I think, Councillor Whittam. But yeah. So the people present for it were Councillor Seaton, Councillor Whittam, Councillor Livingston and Councillor Morris. just the four of us. So I think I think those are agreed. Agreed. Thank you. And the next set of minutes was for the 8th of June, where a few more of us were in attendance. Are people happy that those are a correct record of the meeting? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We move on to development management, item 6 on the agenda. Next item of business concerns the determination of planning applications. So I'd like to start by reminding everyone on the committee of the guidance on the conduct of our business. First of all, officers will present the report, outline the recommendations and answer questions raised by the committee. Following that, if present and wishing to speak, the following may then address the committee for no more than 3 minutes each. First of all, one spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. By now you'd need to have identified a single spokesperson. If more than one objector wishes to speak, the time will be divided accordingly within the 3 minutes slot. So as far as I'm aware, we haven't heard yet, but we can cover that again when we reach that point on the agenda. Secondly, the applicant or their agent. Thirdly, one spokesperson representing any supporters of the application who lives within 100 metres of the development site. And finally, a ward councillor representing the area affected by the proposal. Ward members in attendance and those nominated to speak on behalf of objectors, supporters and applicants should sit in the front row of the public gallery. This is for ease of communication between the committee and the speaker, so we'll ask people to come forward at that point. In case any issues need to be clarified later in proceedings. It's not an opportunity to take part in the debate of the committee. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspects of the proposal and should avoid repeating information which is already in the report. The meeting is not a hearing where all participants participate evidence to be examined by other participants. At the end of each representation, the committee may ask questions of the presenter. Speakers should lead the committee on subjects on which they would welcome further questioning. After receiving all submissions, the committee will debate the application and consider the recommendation. This is a council committee meeting which is open to the public and there should be no interruptions of its proceedings from the audience. Finally, I'd like everyone present to know that although the planning committee comprises of members of different political parties, none of us here are politically whipped. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy and are based on the information contained within the relevant reports, together with the consultation responses and any verbal submissions made today. How we approach these applications is set out in the Development Management Report at item number 5, and if members are happy to note that report, we will move on to considering the planning applications. Are members happy to note that report? Yes. Thank you. That brings us to item 6.1, Zone H of the Canada Water Master Plan, land forming the southwestern part of Printworks at Surrey Quays Road. So I'd like to hand over to Gemma to present the report.
Thank you. Good evening, members. The application that we will be discussing this evening is a reserved matters application for the extension and conversion of the former Printworks building to accommodate circa 45,000 square metres of commercial floor space, comprising office and flexible workspace and retail. The building will also include facilities for TfL bus drivers in connection with the bus stands proposed in Printworks Street. This reserved matters application is submitted pursuant to the outline permission granted in 2020 for the Canada Water Master Plan redevelopment by British Land. The application relates only to Zone H of the Master Plan, which has then been subdivided into plots. This particular plot covers land occupied by the former Printworks building, the press hall and spine buildings, other elements of the building such as the automated reel store, manual reel store and northern storage buildings have been demolished to make way for Zone L and the substation. The proposal is for two buildings known as H1 and H2, which will be linked at first floor level by way of an internal bridge structure. The proposed works include creation of a public route through buildings H1 and H2, providing access from Printworks Street to the future park, a roof level extension, an extension on the southern end of the building to create a new entrance fronting Printworks Place, and recladding the building. I would draw your attention to the addendum which has been circulated to members. The addendum confirms the potential seal payment, identifies additional objections received since the report was published, sets out minor clarifications required for the main report, and tweaks to the recommended conditions, with the most significant being an amendment to the hours of operation condition. Finally, the addendum includes a letter from TfL in respect of Printwork Street and briefing notes from British Land in respect of the proposal and the cultural offer across the master plan. This application has been submitted following a period of pre-application discussions with officers to discuss the detailed design of the building and public realm. The proposal accords with the outline planning permission already granted in terms of the proposed land use, the general design approach and the approved parameter plans. This slide shows the wider master plan boundary and the site boundary for Plot H. This image shows the various phases of the wider master plan as approved in 2020. The master plan aims to create a major new town centre comprising a diverse mix of retail, residential, office, leisure and cultural facilities. Construction is underway on plots A1, A2 and K1, which were approved in detail as part of the outline permission, and a range of enabling works are also being undertaken on plot H. Reserved matters applications have been granted for the dock and Printwork Street. RMA applications for zones F and L are due to be considered by the Planning Committee later this month. Both of these plots comprise a mix of residential and commercial development. Plot L includes 77% affordable housing, of which the split would be 64% social rent and 13% intermediate. The outline permission was granted subject to various parameters which establish the maximum parameters within which future buildings and spaces can come forward, such as the maximum building height, minimum and maximum building lines, basement extents and permitted uses for each master plan zone. These parameters are contained within the development specification and the parameter plans which were approved as part of the outline permission. In addition, the design code document set out the detailed design principles against which any subsequent reserved matters application should be assessed. As shown on this slide, the outline planning permission defines a range of potential uses and maximum floor space caps which can be delivered within each zone, as well as an overall cap for the master plan site. The outline planning permission allowed for the Printworks building to be retained or demolished as part of the redevelopment and for a range of uses to be provided, including workspace and retail. This reserved matters application is entirely consistent with the outline approval in terms of land use and quantum of development, and the detailed design reflects the principles established by the approved design codes. As stated earlier in this application, the proposal relates specifically to the former press hall and spine buildings of the main Printworks. This slide shows the existing building, which is located to the northeast of the master plan site area. The existing buildings currently operate as an entertainment venue, which was approved as a meanwhile use. The site is not located within a conservation area, and nor is it within the curtilage of a listed building. The site is bound by a proposed residential development forming Zone L of the Canada Water Master Plan to the north, by a planned public park to the east, a proposed mixed-use commercial and residential block forming Part F to the south, and to the west, on the opposite side of Printwork Street, beyond the site boundary, there is the nearly complete student housing block known as Scape, and a site known as Hawker House, which is currently occupied by a variety of meanwhile uses, but with a proposal for commercial redevelopment by Art Invest. In the wider vicinity, there are existing dwellings and the Alfred Salter School. The site is within the Canada Water Opportunity Area and is a designated major town centre. Development plan policies aim to deliver at least 460,000 square metres of new office space in the borough, with around 20% of new offices being delivered in the Canada Water and Old Kent Road opportunity areas. The policy sets a target of 20,000 jobs to be delivered in Canada Water. The proposed commercial use of this building will deliver a significant quantum of office space, which is entirely consistent with development plan policies and the outline permission. The proposal has the potential to deliver up to circa 3,000 full-time jobs. This level of employment would make a valuable contribution to the borough and should be regarded as a significant positive benefit of this scheme. A policy-compliant provision of construction and end-use employment and training opportunities was secured as part of the outline permission. Affordable workspace has also been secured. Retail and cafe uses are allowed for within the approved development specification. The proposed location will activate the park edge of the building and the adjacent public realm, creating a positive relationship for the future park. It is noted that a significant number of objections have been received in respect of the loss of the club and entertainment venue currently operating on the site. Planning permission was granted in 2016 for temporary use of the Printworks building as an entertainment venue for 5 years. This was subsequently extended by another 5 years in 2021. The temporary permission will expire in May 2026. It is acknowledged that this use has been very successful. However, the events use was initiated as a short-term interim use in 2016, pending development of the building within the master plan. It was never intended to be a permanent use of the site. Southwark Plan Policy P46 does seek to protect leisure, arts and cultural uses, which are recognised as important social and economic contributors to the borough. However, this protection applies to established permanent uses, and it would be inappropriate to apply the policy to the protection of this meanwhile use. In this particular instance, it must be recognised that the cultural use is temporary, and that this was understood at the point that the club and entertainment venue was established. The site has the benefit of an extant permission for redevelopment, and as such, a meanwhile use, albeit successful, should not prevent the implementation of a long-term vision established by the master plan approval. The outline planning permission allows for demolition or conversion of this building and for the plot to be used for a variety of uses, of which only 1,500 square metres could be for a nightclub. The outline permission established the principle of development, and this reserved matters complies with the approved quantum and range of land uses, and therefore it would not be reasonable or appropriate to resist the development set out in this reserved matters application, given the outline permission. This application proposes an extension to the southern end of the existing Printworks building, together with a roof extension. The refurbished and extended building would comprise a Part 5, Part 6, Part 7-storey building with a spacious double height entrance lobby on the southern facade facing Printworks Place. A conversion of the existing building is welcome from a design and sustainability perspective, and the extensions are of an appropriate scale and design, reflecting the principles established by the outline approval. The outline planning permission allows for a number of tall buildings throughout the master plan site, and specifically for the retention, conversion and extension of the existing Printworks. The proposed building would be surrounded on all sides by public realm, providing pedestrian access around the site. The main entrance to H1 would be from Printworks Place. The main H2 building entrance is located at the junction of Real Walk and Printworks Walk, and at the corner of the park on the south-eastern facade. Secondary entrances are available on the eastern and western facades into the A1, A5 retail units. These entrances activate the routes along Real Walk and the park. As part of a separate reserved matters application, it is proposed to create a new street along the length of the Printworks building, providing vehicular access to the building as well as a new bus standing area. This street, known as Printworks Street, will run to the west of the building, linking Surrey Quays Road with Quebec Way. The proposal comprises two separate buildings within an envelope which externally will read as one building. Buildings H1 and H2 will be connected by a central circulation space, referred to as the street, at first floor level. On the upper levels, the two sections of the building will be fully separated from each other, with their own cores, main entrances and servicing access. At ground floor level, the two buildings will be separated by Printworks Walk. The ground floor would comprise a range of flexible commercial units facing the future park and retail units on the northern facade facing Real Street. On the Printworks Street facade, the building would comprise a mix of retail, facilities for bus drivers and necessary servicing and plant areas. Access for cycles is provided through the main entrance, and both buildings have been provided with dedicated service yards, with H1 access from Printworks Street and H2 accessed from Real Street. The upper levels of the building would comprise office space positioned around a central atrium, which can be subdivided to meet the future needs of occupiers. Accessible roof terraces will be provided on levels 3, 4, 5 and 6 of the building. These terraces are for occupiers of the commercial units and will not be open to the public. It is proposed to extend the building vertically on the southern end and by 1 floor at roof level, which would take the overall height of the building to 34 metres. As such, the proposal must demonstrate exemplary design quality, reflecting its status as a tall building of landmark significance. The chosen architectural style is appropriate for the intended commercial use and responds well to the emerging character of the area. The materials proposed have been carefully selected to reflect the Printworks' former industrial use. The materials palette proposes a grey metal cladding system for the press hall element and green metal cladding for the spine. This striking contrast in colours gives a clear identity to the building, as well as helping to break up the massing, particularly when viewed from the east. The design seeks to respond to the industrial heritage of the site, whilst offering a modern, flexible and unique office environment intended to become a distinctive employment destination within the town centre. The proposed extensions will complement the existing retained structures, and the materials palette will result in a high-quality building which will make a positive contribution to the townscape. The heritage impact of the redevelopment of the Canada Water Master Plan site was robustly considered as part of the outline planning permission. The impact of retaining or demolishing the existing Printworks building formed part of that assessment, and the proposal was deemed to be acceptable. This reserved matters application does not introduce any new considerations in respect of impact on heritage assets. This slide is intended to show the style and quality of the workspace on offer. A pedestrianised public route would be provided through the buildings, linking Printworks Street with Real Street and the park. This route would be known as Printworks Walk. This area of public realm is formed by physically cutting through the existing building to reveal its structure and form. The proposed route would be double height on either end, with a reduced single-storey height in the centre, where the existing connection and base of the retained press hall connects between H1 and H2. At this crossing point, users of the walk are able to see up and into the building, and users of the building are able to see down onto the public walk, which accords with the outline planning permission design code. This route will be an attractive, well-lit and activated space capable of accommodating pop-ups and exhibitions. This important public route will form part of the public realm captured by Schedule 18 of the Section 106 agreement, which sets out controls in respect of standards of construction, maintenance, access and permitted closures. The eastern facade of the building will front onto the new public park. The building has been designed to respond positively to the park with a series of small retail or flexible commercial units to activate this edge. The application boundary for this reserve matters is drawn tightly around the building structure, but the building is surrounded by a series of street and public spaces, including the new park, which are all subject to separate approvals and will in combination provide extensive areas of landscape and public realm. The building will respond positively to the future planned public realm surrounding the site and will also provide an important east-west pedestrian route through this part of the town centre. This particular plot does not immediately adjoin any neighbouring buildings. The Scape Student Housing Scheme and Hawker House are located to the west and will be separated by a road with minimum distance of 16 metres between facades. Mixed-use commercial and residential blocks proposed as part of the BL Master Plan will be located to the north, Plot L, as well as to the south, Plot F. A distance of 22 to 37 metres would be retained between this building and the closest facade of Plot F. As shown on this slide, the most sensitive relationship in terms of overlooking will be with the proposed residential dwellings in Zone L, with a distance of 18 metres between facades. The northern elevation of this building has been designed as a predominantly glazed facade to maximise opportunities for daylight to the office floor plates. However, its relationship to the proposed residential uses on Zone L requires care to be taken to minimise overlooking. To address this, glazing has been proposed to be fitted with a pattern to control overlooking and light spill, while providing the office users with the necessary access to daylight and controlled views out. The impact of the development in terms of daylight and sunlight was assessed and deemed to be acceptable as part of the outline permission. At that time, a building envelope in terms of the maximum height and footprint of a building on this plot was established, having taken account of known development on neighbouring sites and the relationship with other parts of the master plan. This included an assessment of the impact upon the adjacent Scape Student Housing Scheme and in respect of the relationship between the plot and the adjacent BL plots. Given the assessment undertaken at outline stage, it would not be reasonable to reassess that impact as part of this RMA, unless there has been a significant change in baseline conditions or a significant change to the worst case scenario tested at outline stage. Subject to conditions to control detailed operation and servicing hours and to secure the installation of the fritted glazed feature on the north facade, the proposal would not give rise to significant harm to neighbouring amenity by way of overlooking, loss of privacy, noise or disturbance. Matters of wind, ecology, solar glare, air quality and flood risk were fully considered at the outline permission stage and were also addressed as part of the ES Statement of Conformity submitted with this application, which has been discussed in detail in the report. In terms of sustainability, a site-wide approach to energy and carbon emission reductions was approved as part of the outline permission. An up-to-date energy assessment was submitted with this application, as well as whole-life carbon assessment and circular economy statement to address current policy requirements. The decision to retain the existing structure has led to significant savings in embodied carbon, and the development has been designed to minimise operational carbon as much as possible. The development would achieve BREEAM Excellent and a carbon saving of 53% on site, with the remainder offset by way of a carbon green fund contribution. Heat pumps and PV panels have been maximised. In terms of transport, the development would be car-free except for blue badge parking, servicing and deliveries. Substantial contributions were secured at outline permission stage towards sustainable transport improvements. Additional conditions are recommended in respect of appropriate servicing hours, given the proximity of the site to planned residential dwellings. Consultation responses and third-party objections have been set out in detail in the report. At the time of publication of the committee report, a total of 684 representations had been received. In total, there were 7 letters of support, 2 neutral, and 675 objections, including a letter of objection from Alfred Salter Primary School. 3 additional objections were received as set out in the addendum. It should be noted that the majority of representations received are postal addresses outside of the borough. It is important to note that a change.org petition has been set up to save Printworks nightclub. The petition has over 10,000 signatures to date. This petition has not been submitted to the council, but it was mentioned in some of the objections. Issues raised have been set out in detail in the report and have been addressed in the assessment of the application. The main reason cited by the majority of the objectors is the loss of the existing entertainment venue, specifically the nightclub, which is a very popular and successful use. Printworks is considered to be a world-famous iconic music venue. The success of the existing use is fully understood. However, as set out in detail in the report, the music and entertainment use currently permitted was granted planning permission as a temporary use for the building. Whilst it has been an appropriate and successful meanwhile use in its current context, it was never intended to be a permanent use for this site. The outline permission allows for the demolition or conversion of this building and for the plot to be used for a variety of uses, of which only 1,500 square metres could be for a nightclub. The outline permission established the principle of redevelopment, and this reserved matters complies with the approved quantum and range of land uses, and therefore it would not be reasonable or appropriate to resist redevelopment given that permission. In addition to the nightclub allowance of 1,500 square metres, the outline planning permission includes an allowance for cultural and leisure uses in zones D, E, F and H of the master plan, so there is scope for leisure and cultural uses to come forward within the town centre. The existing nightclub significantly exceeds the permitted quantum for a permanent nightclub. Whilst this scale of a nightclub can be accommodated as a meanwhile use in this location, it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate as part of a redevelopment of the area, with new residents living in very close proximity. There is no sound policy reason for resisting this proposal on the grounds of the loss of the music venue. Other objections relate to the question as to whether there is still demand for office space in London, impacts upon infrastructure, transport and sustainability, design and impact on neighbours. For the reasons set out in the report and discussed in this presentation, the proposal is considered to be acceptable in terms of design, sustainability, transport and impact on neighbours. The Section 106 agreement attached to the outline planning permission, to which this reserved matters will be found, includes a significant package of mitigation by way of on-site improvements and financial contributions to mitigate the impact of the development. In conclusion, for the reasons set out in the report and discussed in this presentation, the proposal is considered to be a positive form of development for the borough. The proposal accords with the outline permission and relevant development plan policies. An EIA statement of conformity has been provided to demonstrate that the assumptions, conclusions and mitigation secured at outline stage are still fit for purpose, and this reserved matters would not give rise to new significant effects. It is therefore recommended that planning permission be granted for this reserved matters application, subject to the recommended additional conditions as set out in the draft recommendation at Appendix 1 of the main report, and taking account of the revisions as set out in the addendum.
Thank you. Do members of the committee have any points of clarification they wish to raise with officers? I've seen two hands shoot up very quickly, so I'm going to go to Councillor Whittam first.
I have several points of clarification on Printworks Street, but I don't know whether it's best to address them to Gemma or to the applicant or to our transport person. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name or where you work for.
Sean Good,
And
NRP.
NRP.
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
Norman Rourke Prime.
Do you want me to ask?
I'm going to ask you, Councillor Whittam, if you could ask the questions here, and then if officers can answer them, we'll take them here. If they need to be referred to the applicants, we can do that as well.
Okay. We've got several different statements to do with Printworks Street. The one on here says Printworks Street will be delivered adjacent to Printworks building, subject to a separate approved RMA. Will provide additional pedestrian and cycle permeability for people travelling in the locality, and doesn't mention the buses. In the report, on page 130 at the top, 117 at the bottom, the design review panel said when they considered the external public spaces, the panel felt that the Printworks Street frontage needed further attention. It looks like a back street and a single token retail unit is there. In the letter from Transport for London, I'm very concerned about the School Street, which if Printworks Street is not two-way, then that will disturb the School Street. So when we were discussing last year about Printworks Street is down at the moment as a single direction. If it doesn't go into a double direction, then it can cause a lot of problems. And I know that British Land are trying to make it into a two-way street, but it depends on other landowners. But are the planners and Southwark Council helping with those negotiations or not? How far have they got, and is it going to happen? Sorry it's so long.
That's very helpful. So to summarise, I think there's probably three different elements to that. First of all, most importantly, the use of the street, who uses it, what direction the travel is, where, how the whole phasing of that works, and the fact there appears to be conflict in the statements about who uses that street. Secondly, the design elements about that elevation of the building and the fact that it appears from the DRP a fairly sterile frontage onto that street. And thirdly, the impact on the school street at Alfred Salters. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll start to answer and then I'll pull in relevant colleagues as required. So probably first of all, just quite an important point to note is that the creation of Printwork Street doesn't actually form part of this application. So just to make everybody aware of that. So that was subject to a separate reserved matters approval. Nevertheless, to answer your question, so the purpose of Printwork Street connecting Quebec Way to Surrey Quays Road is that it is a key vehicular route through the site. So it's key to providing access to service plots H and Real Street, so L, which we'll see later in the month. So it has a very important role to play in terms of servicing. It's also going to be an important bus route. At the moment, it isn't intended to provide any additional bus stops for passengers in Printwork Street, but the outline permission included approval for bus stands in Printwork Street and some bus driver facilities within this building. So it has that important function to play. It has been designed to be a pleasant environment for pedestrians as well. So in the separate reserved matters application, the details on our website will show that there are areas of seating and planting, generous pavement widths. You know, it is fully intended to be a pleasant street for pedestrians. That said, it might not be your street of choice once the full development is realised and the master plan is built out, because there will be more pedestrianised and dedicated kind of cycle routes to the eastern side of Printworks building, and we can see on the image where the park is there linking up to a number of quieter routes throughout the master plan. So that's the overall concept for the street and its intentions. It has been approved as a one-way street. The outline permission allowed for that. There isn't physical space within BL's ownership to deliver a two-way street, so permission was granted for a one-way street. However, officers and TfL have always maintained an aspiration for this to be a two-way street when adjacent developments come forward. That is starting to be a more realistic opportunity, because, as we know, we have the adjacent Hawker House site, which we've recently had a resolution to grant planning permission for redevelopment, and part of that proposal was to give up the piece of land required within their ownership to make Printwork Street a two-way street. And we are actively talking to the student housing scheme to coordinate their part of the street as well. So everyone is still very much committed to delivering a two-way street, including British Land as one of the developers. So those conversations are still going on, and we very much hope to kind of progress those in the very near future. In terms of the DRP comments, I might hand over to Michael, and then if there are any more technical transport-related matters that I haven't covered, Sean can scoop those up. Thank you. Sorry? Oh, School Street, sorry. School Street. So there is a School Street closure programme which has gone through, and that will mean certain parts of Quebec Way, Roberts Close and Canada Street are closed during school pick-up and drop-off times. British Land fully understand that and have developed their servicing strategy for Plot H based around those restrictions. So there shouldn't be a conflict in that respect.
Just saying the TfL letter that P12s will be driving through the School Street when it's closed.
That the bus route and the relationship between TfL and Southwark Highway Authority actually kind of sits outside of the scope of planning, actually, and beyond the scope of this planning application. So I think they will have separate discussions about how appropriate it is for buses, environmentally friendly buses, to travel through the street at that time, but that isn't technically a planning issue. It's not something for us to control as part of the planning process.
Thank you, Chair. If I can also pick up the points about the design review panel, if I can direct members to page 11 in your pack, which has the ground floor plan for the scheme. The scheme came to the design review panel at pre-application stage, before the final drawings that were prepared and submitted for the application. And at that time, the concern was about the sort of lack of activation of active frontages onto Printwork Street along which on that page is across the top of that plan. But as you see now, the final scheme that was submitted includes is bookended either end by the reception at the left-hand side, the main reception of the building on the left-hand side, and a large retail unit on the other end, and then a couple of other retail outlets in the middle, as well as there'll be some bus facilities for bus drivers on that same frontage too, and the Printwork walk, the route through, is also going to be the main route in for cyclists into the facility, into the building. So there'll be access to cycle facilities there too. So it's intended that this is, I guess, the complexity of reusing an existing building where that side of the building was, had mainly service facilities. But what they've done is bring in as much activation that they can to Printwork Street, and also incorporate it fully into the way that people will walk around and experience the building. So at the main entrance points, at the main routes through and so on, there is a degree of activation which was a direct response to the points made by the design review panel. Also, there is the landscape and all the more detail that came in with the application on Printwork Street itself, which showed how it was to be landscaped as well as laid out in terms of its, allowing for pedestrians and so on, and making sure that it complies with all our requirements. So we're satisfied that the points raised by the panel have been addressed in this application.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Newens.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask for, there are a couple of points of clarification that I wanted to ask for. First of all, the report refers to the fact that the plot will achieve a UGF score of 0.2, but that there is an intention that it will overall end up as 0.3, and then with the mixed development 0.35. What safeguards are there in place to ensure that that actually happens?
Okay, so the difference between the two scores is that the red line boundary for this application is drawn very tight to the building, and the adjacent areas of soft landscape and public realm will come forward as other reserved matters applications. So most notably the park. So the park is immediately adjacent to this building, and that will significantly raise the urban greening factor. There is a Section 106 requirement for 50% of the park to be delivered prior to the occupation of this building. So that's how we know that it will happen. Is that?
Thank you. I wanted to ask as well, referring to point 248 on page 73, it says that we will be fulfilling our minimum requirements according to the London plan in terms of cycle parking, but not according to the Southwark plan. And I appreciate that the time factor there, but is there any reason why we can't achieve the Southwark plan's targets in this application, given that that is now the Southwark plan?
Okay, so just to clarify that we were required to assess the outline application at a given point in time, taking account of the current policies at that time. And so that's where the quantum of cycle parking was established within the approved development specification for the outline permission. So it isn't within our gift to revisit that as part of this approval of details. So that that's kind of a factual part of the consent. I mean, it's still a very generous provision of cycle parking that we feel will meet the needs of the occupiers, but it would be unreasonable now, as part of a reserved matters application, for us to expect the developer to comply with recently adopted Southwark policy standards.
Sorry, thank you. Can you explain what the difference is then? In terms of, is that, I don't think that's there, is it?
I can't immediately, but we can calculate the difference and come back to you on that. I mean, there will be a difference in quantum because our standards are pretty rigorous. I'm sorry, I don't have the number immediately.
The numbers are there, actually. Yeah, sorry. And can I ask as well about the... So the calculation, the carbon offset payment, which so it says there's carbon saving of 53% on site, which is shortfall of 40% between. I suppose I don't understand what the 30 in the calculation of that is. That's on page 79. So 247.1 tonnes times 30 times 95. Yeah.
Okay, so the policy position is for a 40% on-site saving, enabling you to then make a financial contribution between whatever you achieve and 100%. So then the calculation is set out in our SPD, so that's our adopted formula for calculating what that cost should be. So it's your tonnes times 30, which is 30 years, I think. And then a cost at £95. So that's our kind of set formula for calculating that contribution. But this is a policy compliance scheme in terms of exceeding 40% on-site savings.
Thank you. I wanted to ask as well, there's supposed to be 1,500 square metres set aside for nightclub provision, and that's... could you talk a little bit more about where that will be provided? And I also wanted to ask if you could talk about so much is made of the fact that there is not extensive demolition in this application. Could you talk about a little bit more about sort of any demolition that is required in relation to this application and how that impacts on the rest of the or the rest of the site?
Okay.
Thanks.
So just to explain a bit about what the outline permission allows, it allows a range of land uses and quantums of development that could come forward within each plot. So we're not requiring a nightclub to come forward, but there is a quantum of development that could come forward within a number of the plots. So I think if we look on this chart, this kind of explains it quite well. So a nightclub could come forward in Zone D, it could come forward in Zone H, Zone F, or... Is that it? No, yeah, sorry, H or D, sorry. So it could come forward in H or D. That's not to say that we are definitely requiring it to come forward. It's just that was identified as a suitable plot. As we know, it isn't being proposed for H, and we don't have the reserve matters details for plot D yet. So I think it's important to understand the difference between what might come forward as opposed to us saying this must come forward within plot D. So that remains to be discussed for the future. In terms of the existing building and what might be demolished, so what will be retained is the existing press hall and spine. So if you look on this image, it's kind of everything to the left-hand side of the screen. The kind of later additions and kind of single-storey structures, they need to be demolished to make way for the master plan to come forward. So that part of this building, if it wasn't demolished, we wouldn't be able to build the park. And the northern parts of the building, if they weren't demolished, we wouldn't be able to build Zone L, where the residential development is proposed. So the kind of key part of the structure is to be retained, but those kind of additional warehouse elements will be demolished as approved as part of the outline permission.
Thank you.
Councillor Leeming. Oh, sorry. Actually, Councillor Cumbo indicated earlier.
Thank you, Chair. I note that a number of the objections relate to the impact on young people in particular. That hasn't been reflected in the Equalities Impact Assessment. So I just wondered if there was any more you could say about the extent to which we've engaged with that criticism and that potential problem.
I'm not sure how much more I can say, to be honest, based on, I think the report quite clearly sets out that this was a meanwhile use. That was always known at the point that this use commenced. This site was going to be redeveloped. It is a very successful meanwhile use, but it is exactly that. It is a temporary use. We appreciate that it serves the needs of the community, but we don't feel that its redevelopment would prejudice anyone of a particular protected characteristic. There are other opportunities throughout the master plan development for cultural uses to come forward. It may be something that you want the applicant to speak a bit more about this evening, but we certainly don't believe that there is a justification to refuse this application on the basis of the success of the existing temporary use.
Councillor Leeming.
Thank you. Two questions. The first of which is related. And have we done anything to help the existing nightclub find a different space in Southwark? The GLA Mayor has a culture and community spaces at risk team. Have we referred them to that to see if they can find another space? And secondly, maybe I should know the answer to this, but are we allowed to understand the contents of the objection letter from the Alfred Salter Primary School?
Thank you. So in terms of the objection from the Alfred Salter School, that's set out separately in the report. So I'll just find the page. And just to explain that actually the Alfred Salter the letter from Alfred Salter School was actually submitted under this planning application reference number, but raised largely concerns with the construction of Printwork Street, which obviously is a separate reserved matters application, but we have set out the details of their comments and our response to that. In terms of whether have done anything to assist relocation of the Printworks building, in short, no. It is a meanwhile use. I don't know if Colin might want to say something else about that.
Yes, it is something we've discussed with the applicants, and I think probably if you, the applicant probably would be able to give you a kind of latest on where that's got to. But as Gemma said, it's a meanwhile use, and this is the determination of a detailed approval around an approval for this to be used as office. So on that basis, we haven't led on that. But obviously, the developer is able to kind of tell you a bit more about that, I think.
Could I raise? Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to raise a question. So you mentioned that the majority of objections came from outside of the borough. Have we got a quantum of that, either exactly or roughly, but just so that we can understand the scale
yes.
of what was out of the borough in terms of objections?
In the addendum, I've given the full breakdown of the number. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's 105, so that people are aware of that figure. You mentioned also when areas, I think it's L and F are coming forward. When have we got a timescale roughly for H3? Because obviously this is H1 and 2.
No, I don't have a time frame for H3. That might be something that the applicant can discuss this evening.
Okay, if there's no further questions from officers, let us move on to representations. First of all, does anyone wish to speak in objection to the application that's here in the meeting? No, we don't appear to have any objectors. In that case, can we move on to the applicant or their agent, whether they wish to come forward. I understand there may well be three of you, so feel welcome to bring up a third chair. Yeah. Unfortunately, you still only get 3 minutes, so hopefully you can divide that time between you, and I hope you've worked out who's going to say what and when. But if you could first of all start by introducing yourselves to the committee, and then the time will start after you've finished the introductions.
Good evening, I'm David Walters. I'm the project lead from British Land for the Printworks.
I'm Hugh Sowerby from DP9.
Good evening, Emma Carriaga. I'm the joint head of the Canada Water Project.
So good evening and thank you for your time tonight. This application and the Printworks itself are incredibly important, both individually and for the Canada Water Master Plan as a whole. It's the first building of many to come forward for reserved matters under the outline permission, which was granted unanimously in 2020. The wider master plan will deliver around 2 million square feet of offices, up to 3,000 homes, of which 35% will be affordable, and up to 1 million square feet of retail, leisure, culture, education and community space, set within nearly 12 acres of new public streets, parks and squares. All of these uses are essential to support a vibrant new town centre, creating new local employment and a successful economy. Printworks is critical to this master plan, and you'll see by the support of the team we have with us tonight. It alone will provide space for around 3,000 jobs. It will provide shops and restaurants alongside the new public park. It provides important bus infrastructure for Transport for London. Most importantly, it sets a benchmark for sustainable development and will result in the retention and reuse of this iconic structure to create a best-in-class and flexible workspace at the heart of the Canada Water Master Plan. The outline permission grants consent for a range of uses within the Printworks, including the offices and retail uses we're proposing now. In September last year, following years of positive engagement with Southwark's officers, we were excited to submit the detail of our proposals for retaining and adapting the Printworks as part of the reserved matters before you now. We have worked hard to keep as much of the existing structure as possible to deliver a highly sustainable and carbon efficient project. We believe that offices will continue to play an important role in our city and at Canada Water. As a business this year, we've had our strongest year for office leasing in the last 10 years. The Printworks will be flexible, sustainable and able to adapt to the demands of evolving workplace trends. Nonetheless, we are conscious of the success of the Printworks and its meanwhile use as an events venue and the strong following this has created. Culture forms an important part of our vision for Canada Water, and we remain in active discussions with Southwark Live, the current operators, as a key collaborator and customer. As per our briefing notes included within the addendum report I believe you've had, and subject to a bill tonight, we intend to work with Southwark Live and Southwark Council to explore retaining a cultural venue in part of the Printworks, subject to planning, design, funding, viability and operational requirements being satisfied. This is going to take time, however, and in the interim, securing consent tonight enables us to proceed with existing active discussions with occupiers for the remaining office element, and gives us confidence to unlock the wider Printworks site in order to bring forward the delivery of the much-needed affordable homes within the adjacent zone L. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on our proposals, and on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you. Well within time. Congratulations. Any questions? Councillor Papula.
I wanted to quickly ask, it's noted on point 80 that there isn't a formal adoption in terms of affordable workspace, which I believe that 10% here. I just wanted clarification as to the level of affordable workspace in the scheme, because I can't find that here.
Yep, I think it's actually on the same page. So there's a couple of elements to affordable workspace and affordable retail, which are all secured in the section 106. There's a requirement to provide just shy of 5,000 square metres of affordable retail when the master plan's complete, 7,000 square metres of affordable workspace, and 11,500 square metres of co-working floor space as well. There are also obligations in the Section 106 that require that to be delivered as the master plan progresses, so it can't all be back-ended to the end of the development.
Councillor Lehman.
Following on from my earlier question, really, and I note that it's up to 1,500 square metres of space being set aside for the possibility of a nightclub in this location. Now, I would suspect, my clubbing days being long behind me, that's rather smaller than the current space. And I have some assurance that you are actively working with Broadbit, like whatever they call the company, who are currently running it, to find a different space. But it's given that. I suspect one of the reasons this works is it's a large open space, and you're suggesting much smaller spaces. What is out of interest, the range of cultural opportunities that you are considering for this site more widely, and what are the chances of a similar sort of nightclub being able to emerge somewhere on this development?
So I suppose two elements to answer your question. In relation to the printworks, as we say, we are exploring whether we can retain a cultural element within the building. That's very complicated, as you say. That one of the benefits of the current operation is the size of the site that Broadbit are able to make use of makes many of those operational things easier to deal with. So there's a number of challenges to work through there, both with Broadbit but also with your offices. I suppose the other thing to clarify is our vision for that cultural element would be a much broader offer, of which the kind of electronic music element would be a part. As part of this, vibrant new town centre we're looking to create. In terms of the broader cultural offer, as the officer mentioned earlier, there's allowance for nightclub use within Zone D, for which we haven't commenced any discussions yet, as well as broader cultural uses in, I believe it's Zones D, E and F as well. All of which are still to come, obviously this being the first reserve matters under the outline. And it's intention to look at those. I think in the meantime, we're also, you might have seen, doing a huge amount of work as part of a kind of wider activation programme and putting on a number of events, like there's a new Sunday market, which has been really well received, the Warble outside the shopping centre, yoga and Pilates and art class and things that have all been really well received. So it's all part of this wider transformation we're hoping to bring about.
I'm going to allow you a follow-up question to that, Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Indeed, I bought a very nice, if expensive, loaf of bread from the Sunday market only yesterday. I just want to push you harder on what sort of forms of culture you are considering in this development.
So the offer within the printworks, we're still working through exactly what it is. I think the vision would be for a very broad range of things. So electronic live music, dance, exhibition, art, a whole range of programmes within that kind of multifunctional space. As I say, we're still working through that with our operators and partners, so I couldn't really say more than that at the moment, but I think it's safe to say we think it would be really exciting and something that would be locally, nationally and internationally renowned.
Councillor Whittam.
You have heard my questions about Printwork Street. How are the negotiations going with other landowners to make it two-way street?
I think discussions are ongoing with both Scape and with Art Invest, but at the moment I think it's probably a question for officers, because my understanding is that they are in active negotiations with Art Invest over their Section 106 agreement. Once that Section 106 agreement is agreed and finalised, we can then go into the next stage of discussions. I think it's fair to say, as officers mentioned, the council and TfL, their preference is for a two-way street. Our preference is for a two-way street as well, but it is subject to engagement from Art Invest and Scape.
Just don't want it to fall between the cracks, really, and somebody needs to take ownership of it.
That's fine. Councillor Newens.
Thank you, Chair. So in the objections, one of the questions that is raised, and obviously from the perspective of the merits of retaining the site as a nightclub, is to what degree are we sure that the demand exists for the new office space and the new uses for this building. And I wondered if you did have any sort of background sort of investigation on that. Obviously, working practices have changed dramatically. Will they ever go back to what they were? I know that there are a lot of empty offices at the moment in central London. So what sort of feel do you have about how much demand there will be for the new uses that are proposed?
It's a good question, and you're right to raise it. I think the difference here is we're bringing forward a major new town centre that is rightly about offices, but also about homes, shops, leisure and culture, as you've heard. As a business, we had our best leasing success last year across London. The rationale for that is that lots of developers stopped building during COVID, so there is, understandably a shortage of good quality, amazing space for employees who are a bit more discerning about the sort of office environment that they want to come back to. So we feel very confident that what we're delivering at Canada Water is the sort of offices and the sort of environment, this broader town centre offer, which businesses are increasingly looking to locate their businesses into. And then beyond that, I think the Printworks is a very special building. There are very few buildings like that across London. Battersea Power Station would be another good example of where employers use their workspace to attract great talent, to innovate and create amazing work and job opportunities. And so we think particularly that building has and will have draw from a number of employers and businesses domestically or internationally.
Councillor Papula.
Just to continue down that vein, is there demand for the range of cultural activities that you throw out? Only the reason why I throw that out is because I'm quite aware that those activities themselves are very much available in and around the immediate area, and the Printworks itself is a very unique place for a variety of people. So do you think the same sorts of people would want to come for your range of cultural events that you've just stated?
It's a really good question, and I think that's one of the things that we still need to test. Obviously, the COVID pandemic, it was very challenging to carry on with any kind of culture in London. So many of those kind of operations have struggled. The intention would be that the kind of current programme that's happening in the building would help to kind of support the evidence for exactly that, for the kind of wider range I talked about earlier, which is one of the other reasons why it's going to take time to work out exactly what that offer looks like and how we deal with some of those issues. And in the interim, our ability to press on with the wider development and delivered homes and the wider master plan is obviously supported by a positive decision tonight.
Any further questions? Could I follow up my question earlier about when H3 is likely to come forward?
So we haven't commenced any design or discussions, pre-op discussions or similar on that yet. So apologies, don't have any timescales to give you.
Okay, and
sorry, Chair, I was going to say, I think it's fair to say that H3 is in the short term for the next RMA, so it's on the list of the next RMAs to come forward for pre-app discussion, so it's certainly not one of the last plots to come forward.
thank you. And another question was, given the comments by Alfred Salter School, just to ensure that you're happy to work with officers about the concerns about construction traffic to have a minimal impact on the school. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say discussions are already happening with Alfred Salter School. So plot K1, the affordable housing block by on Roberts Close, that is in construction at the moment. We've just gone above ground floor slab, and discussions are progressing very well with the school. And yes, obviously there's a construction site as a neighbour, but actually it's been dealt with very well, and that they are happy it's been managed in an appropriate manner.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. You may return to the audience. Thank you. Okay, do we have anyone present within 100 metres of the development site who wishes to speak in support of the application? I don't believe we have. And finally, is there a ward councillor present who wishes to speak as a ward councillor who is not on the committee? I don't think we have. That brings us to the debate. So would any member wish to speak further on this issue or ask further questions of officers first? Any further questions for officers coming out of that discussion? Any statements that anybody would like to make? Councillor Whittam.
There's a lot that's good about this. I think the retention of most of the building is a very good feature. Yes. It gives a nod to the history, albeit recent history. Michael smiling. And is good for our climate emergency as well. I do hope that the Alfred Salter School street is not disturbed, and I do hope that the two-way Prince Street happens, because that will facilitate movement through the site. I think it's a good scheme.
I'm going to go that way. I think Councillor Cumbo.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with everything that Councillor Whittam has just said. Just on the meanwhile use, I think we recognise that doesn't affect the formal position. Nevertheless, it is obviously a great shame to say goodbye to something that's been successful and positive for the community, not least because of the references that have already been made to the impact of the COVID pandemic. One of them is clearly around the importance of social venues as we leave lockdown or have left lockdown. It is not obviously a reason, as has been said, to resist the application. But it would be. I agree with all the comments that have been made particularly by Councillor Leeming about the importance of ensuring there is some continuity and some continuing availability of cultural space within the development.
Thank you. Apologies, we seem to have some slight interference with the microphone, so if people keep their phones well away from the microphones if they can. Councillor Leeming.
Councillor Cumbo just said what I was about to say for me, so that's kind of. I agree with Councillor Whittam. It's a good scheme. I think it's something that this part of the borough needs. If I have a concern, and this relates to what I do for a day job, which is about supporting the creative industries, there is a need to make sure there's a vibrant cultural offering in this master plan. And what concerns is there's a bit of potential for piecemeal here, with considering these things one by one, and something slips out down the way because something better comes along or more attractive. And I think it needs to be admitted that the creative industries and cultural offerings are an incredibly strong part of our regeneration in the borough. So overall, and how we do that when we're considering these schemes one by one is the bit that worries me. And I think what works very well about cultural and creative offerings is when they arise organically, and sometimes I fear that building them into sort of big schemes like this sort of takes away some of the what makes them very successful in the first place. So obviously that's not a material planning condition, and I will be voting for this, but it is sort of a plea to British Land to keep thinking very hard about the cultural offers as you go forward.
Councillor Papula.
I believe Councillor Cumber and Councillor Lehman have stolen my thunder, but really it's really just a plea from both the council and British Land to ensure that there is an adequate replacement venue for the company. It's been a fantastic cultural landmark, and it'll be a complete shame to see that just completely go.
Councillor Newers, did you want to say something? It's up to you.
Not particularly. I have nothing to add.
That's fine. In that case,
but I would like to emphasise actually that I welcome the fact that the building is being retained. I have the same reservations about the loss of the cultural venue. I think we need to improve our policy to make sure that we are not receiving large carbon offset payments instead of actually ensuring that the development is carbon neutral in the first place. But I appreciate that's something that has to be done outside this committee. But yes, so those are my thoughts.
Thank you. And the comments that I was going to make have been covered very well by the committee so far, but I do welcome the fact that the concerns raised by the school seem to have responded to well in the answers that we've had. Like others on the committee, there is an element of regret about the loss of this cultural space, but it is a meanwhile use, and I think we all recognise that. What it has, and its great success, I think, has exposed is there is a lack of good quality music venues in our borough, and this was very clearly filling a gap there. And so I'm hoping British Land, in its future discussions for other sites within the master plan area, take that on board and are able to work productively to come up with something which helps fulfil that niche, albeit not perhaps in the same way that the current venue does. I know a number of us here have had endurable nights at Printworks one way or another, and so whilst that's not going to happen in the future, I'm hoping that something that we can enjoy equally in the future will come forward as in the design. Given that there don't seem to be any fundamental objections being raised by the committee, can I move forward to a motion on this? So I'd like to move that we adopt the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraphs 1 of the report on page 17 of the main agenda pack. Firstly, that planning permission is granted subject to the additional conditions and informatives as set out in the draft recommendation at Appendix 1. Secondly, that it is noted that this reserve matters application is bound by the Section 106 legal agreement and conditions attached to the outline planning permission 18/AP/1604, and thirdly, the environmental information be taken into account as required by Regulation 26(1) of the Town and County Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations of 2017 as amended. Does any member of the committee wish to second this? I'm taking that as Councillor Leeming. I think he's marginally quicker at getting his hand up. Before the committee proceeds to the vote, any member wish to speak on the motion or proposed amendment? No?
Sorry, can I just add, I didn't hear you mention the addendum as well, so if we could just make sure that's covered in the conditions in the addendum.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as set out, if we refer to the recommendation set out in the addendum, so I think that's just to note the items in the addendum report and to make sure that everybody was aware of that in making these decisions. Is that reasonable? Thank you. So if that can be noted as well within that motion, can I see any votes in favour of the motion? That appears to be unanimous. Thank you. I need to take that formally just in terms of for, against and abstain. So I'm voting in favour for the motion. Councillor Whittam?
For, Chair.
Councillor Cumbo?
For, Chair.
Councillor Leeming?
For, Chair.
Councillor Newens?
For.
Councillor Papula?
For, Chair.
So that motion is carried. The application is granted. I think that brings the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody.